mowing your neighbor's lawn critical to defense strategy? I don't know. Let's ask criminal defense investigator Charles Mittelstadt. Okay, is this a good question? I know you're a fan of his questions, but what about that?
I think he's masterful. He's so good at diffusing these witnesses. He takes what is somewhat innocuous testimony, and then he turns it around and he humanizes Colucci in the process. He's a good guy. He's mowing the common areas. He probably mowed. He actually puts her on the defensive because she won't even admit he obviously mowed her lawn at some point. She won't give him that, right? And then she denies ever seeing her depressed, and he continues as if she has a depression problem. I mean, he's very masterful.
Okay, but and the bigger point in this line of questioning is how much should the defense, their investigators, and actually even the prosecution, I'm opening this question up for a general investigation question to you, is speaking to members of the community, family, friends, trying to get as much information about the relationship between this couple?
I think it's critical in this case, Seema, because what you have is you have a situation where you have no witnesses, where you really have very little evidence connecting the two, like there's no DNA evidence connecting him. And
actually, you queued it up perfectly, Charles Mittelstadt. We have a soundbite. So let's play that.
Okay.
We have a soundbite, and this is cross-examination of Dan Owen, one of the special agents, and this is exactly that issue on the DNA of Colucci.
Now, in those processing for DNA, was any DNA found?
Yes, there was some DNA found.
How much of that was Mr. Colucci's?
None.
Pardon me?
I don't believe any of his DNA was found.
How much of Sarah Colucci's DNA was found?
One sample of Sarah Colucci's DNA was found.
Okay, so no DNA, as you were saying, belonging to Michael Colucci. How do you proceed then?
Well, that's why the dynamics between these two become so important. It's important for the jury to understand, what was this marriage all about? How did these two interact? Was there a depression issue? How did they handle conflict? Since the prosecution's theory deals with the fact that there was some flashpoint that caused him to kill her, it's important for them to understand the dynamics. How did they relate to each other verbally? Who was the hothead in the relationship? Was there one that would diffuse the tension? Who was the peacekeeper? And so you can only establish that by talking to friends, family, community members who have certain observations about it.
Now, we were talking during the break about his phone. I want you to tell the viewers how you would approach that issue, because he wasn't arrested for a year, and there is this time gap between the last communication on his phone, on his cell phone, was 5:46 p.m., his call to 911 at 7:12 p.m., and he's saying he was sitting in the car just 25 feet away from where Sarah Lynn Colucci was killed.
Which does call for some explanation, right? I mean, the burden, the defense isn't supposed to have any burden, but in this case, that one sits out there, and the jury's going to struggle with that very question, like, how does he not see this, right? And so there is some sort of explanation that is necessary in terms of what was he doing in his car that would have distracted him to that point, and building this timeline in a much more concise way than the prosecution is. So the phone is the best tool for doing that, and the last call was at 5:46, but that our smartphones hold our life, right? We do everything on them. So you have all sorts of different applications that are running on there. You have text messages, you have web browsers,
right.
You have social media. And so because he wasn't arrested for a year, that means they also didn't take his phone. And so if it's my case, the first thing I do is I get the client's phone, Colucci's phone, and we get a cell phone forensics expert in there. We image the phone, we get a Celebrite download, and we find out exactly what was going on that phone, what sort of applications were running. Did he go on the web? Was he using Google? Was he searching things?
Would you think the prosecution would have subpoenaed all that?
Absolutely. I mean, I would have certainly wanted to know. I mean, I would have expected there would have been a search warrant for this at some point. I'm not aware that there was, but
right.
But
at this point, we don't know that. Yeah,
we don't know that at this point. So, but digital evidence is always it's very difficult these days to be involved in a case that doesn't involve some form of digital evidence. And on top of that, you have location data within that phone. And even though generally cell tower data is tied to phone calls and text messages, now the cell phone providers also store what's called historical GPS data. And that is available to law enforcement with a subpoena or a court order. And so that would help them establish exactly when they got to this gold standard, when they arrived, and how long he was there. And you would think they'd want to be able to show, like, look, you were there for an hour.
Yes, and so
Right.
so there are ways that both sides can bring in evidence with respect to exactly what Michael Colucci was doing between 5:46 and 7:12 on that phone. What he was looking at, if he was messaging anybody, if he was on the phone, all of that.
Absolutely. And the absence, again, from a prosecution standpoint, the absence thereof of any of that existing would be some of their strongest evidence to say you were distracted and you were using your phone and doing various things, but the fact of the matter is your phone betrays that version of the events, and you couldn't have been distracted. Now, I believe he also says he was listening to music. So, of course, you're not going to, you wouldn't see that on the phone. But, I mean,
But if
I think
he
the
was listening
jury.
to music through the phone, you can find that.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the jury also is going to use their good common sense, and they're going to say, like, look, anybody who has a cell phone and is sitting in a car for any length of time is looking at it, is probably engaging with their phone to some extent, whether they're texting or, so, you know.
Yeah, maybe he was just listening to the phone, you know, had his eyes closed, sitting back, doing a little meditating. I don't know.
Now, and that will certainly be the defense's version if the phone didn't show any sort of applications, any sort of activity going on, right? You'd have to make that argument.
Right, so the bottom line is, according to you, they need to call some type of expert to do a deep dive into that phone.
know what's going on with that phone.
Right, okay. Charles Mittelstadt, thank you so much. And straight ahead, one of Sarah Colucci's cousins is on deck to testify about what she says Michael Colucci told her about Sarah Lynn's death. Also, we'll take a closer look at the greater tragedy of the Colucci clan. Michael Colucci isn't the only family member who's accused of killing a spouse. His stepfather, Ivo Colucci, also facing charges for killing his wife. This is CourtTV, your front row seat to justice.